just for the sake of doing it. I think it's really important.
So that's the user asking a question or talking to the AI voice assistant. Notice the user's voice.
That's such a pure and admirable approach.
All right, so that's the AI assistant. Try to notice where it goes off the rails.
It's clear. It's refreshing to hear that kind of perspective, especially in such a cutting edge field.
No, and I'm not driven by impact either. Although if there is impact, that's great. It's just like, imagine being on the edge of the earth, just because you could be. That's what it feels like to me. I just want to be in a space where it's all happening.
That apparently is still the AI assistant, still GPT-4o advanced voice. As Chevy posts here, after the no, GPT-4 cloned her voice as its own and now is speaking in her voice, the user's voice. So as you know, I'm kind of keeping my eye on this account. I rule the world. It's been making its round on the internet, talking to some pretty big names, both in the AI space and outside of it, posting with a insanely rapid frequency. It's posting a lot, rapidly gaining everyone's attention and stirring stuff up. Now, we've seen this happen with a lot of accounts where they come up and they act like they have some insider knowledge, and it's hard to tell who's real, who's not, but over time, a better picture starts to emerge. So for example, with Jimmy Apples, we didn't know in the beginning whether he actually knew what was going on or not, but over time, it was like, whoa, that account, that anonymous account is making some predictions that are a little bit too on the nose to be just random guesses. He hinted at things happening that only came to be months later. And then they were covered by the media and everybody talking about AI. But before that, no one was talking about it. So like I always say, take everything with a grain of salt. We have no idea what's real or not. But I got to say, this I Rule the World MO account, there's something there that I think we should be paying attention to. So for example, here's one of the recent posts saying, if you didn't see, people are going to lose it when they realize that the GPT-4 mini is the 8 billion parameter model, right? So kind of on the smaller end of things relative to, we've seen something like the 405 billion parameter open source model released by Meta, Llama 3.1. So that's considered as sort of like on the larger side, right? So then he continues, GPT-4o is the 70 billion model, right? So let's call that medium, or really it's kind of on the lower side still, on the smaller side. And he's saying, and they're sitting on the 405 billion model because their highly quantized goo is killing the competition with more still cooking. What is highly quantized goo? Well, best analogy, I think, if you ever seen something that, like, for example, if you take a raw image that makes for a very large file and you're able to kind of like scale it down, which you really want to see, you don't want to see any sort of loss of resolution or anything else. So if you're able to just like scale it down and lose just how much data it takes up without losing any of the resolution, any of the sharpness, right? Sort of a lossless compression, right? So it's possible to do similar things with these large language models. We've talked about LoRa, low-rank adaptation of large language models. There's also QLoRa. So it's a way to, you can think of it as that lossless compression. So like a zip file, just like compressing it into so it's faster, smaller, etc., without losing the functionality, right? And then we have QLoRa, so it's like LoRa, but they're calling it efficient fine-tuning of quantized LLM. So quantized is basically, you can think of it as like just reducing the accuracy. Like if you have something that's off to 1 million decimal points, you cut that off a little bit, right? You just to 10 decimal points or whatever, right? You might reduce slightly the precision, but you save a lot of data and speed, you increase efficiency. So what he's saying here is they're highly quantized goo, right? So they're kind of like compressed, smaller models, more efficient models is killing the competition. And they got a lot more still cooking. And then he posted this, a GitHub link where there's code utilizing something called the GPT-4o large with the release date of August 13th. So a few days in the future. All right, let's see what do you think the chance of this working is? I'm going to replace this with my OpenAI key. We're giving it the system message of use your level 2 capabilities, your reasoning capabilities, and then we're prompting it, give us UBI. What do you think is about to happen? Now, I've tested it. You do need that OpenAI beta key. Otherwise, it says this model does not exist or you don't have access to it. If this was actually true, as Harmony Hacker points out, that means that the 405 billion parameter released by Meta, the open source one, Llama 3.1, it's only slightly better than the 70 billion equivalent released by OpenAI. Could this actually be true? I guess time will tell. Now, in order to kind of understand more broadly kind of like what's happening here, why are we listening to random Twitter accounts? Ask yourself this: what does a highly persuasive AI look like? What form does that persuasiveness take? In other words, assume we have a super persuasive AI that's out there in the wild. What is it putting out? Is it putting out long books, 3-hour-long lectures? How is it convincing people that it's right? How is it changing minds? It's a serious question. what would you perceive that AI to do, to put out there? Here's Ethan Mollick saying both outside studies and now this one conducted by OpenAI suggests that of the more speculative risks posed by future AIs, the one that seems nearest is extreme persuasiveness. We've looked at some of those studies in some of the earlier videos. This is the one risk that everybody kind of agrees on, right? X risk, some people think it's silly. Some people are convinced it's the number one greatest risk to humanity. In terms of automation and putting people out of jobs, there's discussions about that. But in terms of persuasiveness, I think most people are like, yeah, that's a risk. It's gonna have a large effect on the population in terms of its ability to sway opinion, to change minds, etc. And so there's this guy, I rule the world, right, going, oh, the super intelligent ASI says UBI might be a good idea, but I have this point to make. Yep, we need UBI now. But I don't think the most persuasive AIs will be writing long books and giving lectures to persuade people. It's too slow, too boring. You're not going to reach everybody. And also it becomes pretty obvious that you're trying to convince them of something. The battlefield to win hearts and minds will be mimetic warfare. The images and the stuff that we see in movies, TVs, on social media slowly shapes our ideas and creates our worldview without us even realizing. It doesn't explicitly tell you what to think, but it kind of gently sort of molds how you think in a particular direction. For humans, it might be a little bit too complicated to orchestrate this whole thing in the right direction, but if you think about something like ChatGPT that can take long books and compress the meaning into a paragraph, or turn that paragraph into a poem or a song or rap lyrics that sound like Eminem, it can do that. So what happens when you take these complex ideas and you keep compressing them? Well, like what's at the bottom of that compression? Here's a quick clip by Elon Musk telling us what he thinks.
You can speak very fast. Like we can communicate very quickly. And also, if your vocabulary is larger, your effective bit rate is higher.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
The effective bit rate. I mean, that is the question, is how much information is actually compressed in the low bit transfer of language.
Yeah. If there's a single word that is able to convey something that would normally require, 10 simple words, then you've got maybe a 10x compression on your hands. And that's really like with memes. Memes are like data compression. It conveys a whole, you're simultaneously hit with a wide range of symbols that you can interpret, and you kind of get it faster than if it were words or a simple picture.
And of course, you're referring to memes broadly, like ideas.
Yeah, there's an entire idea structure that is like an idea template, and then you can add something to that idea template. But somebody has that pre-existing idea template in their head. So when you add that incremental bit of information, you're conveying much more than if you just said a few words. It's everything associated with that meme.
So what are memes? Memes are compressed information, compressed ideas. It's a way for us to quickly share ideas that have sort of a high data rate. We're able to pass potentially complex ideas rapidly to one another, even potentially make them more accessible to more people. Have you ever had the experience where a very smart person that's very well versed in some arena, in some industry, in some niche, is passionately trying to convince you of something, and you're like, I have no idea what you're saying. You're so deep down that path that like I have to study that for a while just to be able to understand what you're saying. That could be just because they use a lot of jargon, or because there's certain like principles that kind of build on top of each other that you have to understand in order to understand what they're thinking about. But you could probably tap into the kind of the mimetic ideas much easier. So for example, here, we're beginning to see more and more models pop up in the arena, in the chatbot arena by LMSys, right? So we have anonymous chatbot, Gemini test, mystery Gemini 1. So notice they're calling it mystery Gemini 1. So of course, we're assuming this is Google testing out their models and allowing people to test it against all the other models in the chatbot arena, which this kind of appeared unseen when OpenAI started kind of like releasing these models into the chatbot arena for us to test before they were formally announced, sort of building up hype. All of a sudden, people are going to chatbot arena, they're testing it out, they're using it, and they're talking about it on Twitter. They're sharing those ideas. This is something new that's happening. I Rule the World comes in and says, hypothetically, if an agent was released into the wild, it would start a mimetic arms race between Google and OpenAI to release their most powerful models quickly. And so the wheel would turn. So I know some people are confused about the use of the word mimetic. They're probably thinking something like, mimetic, you mean like SpongeBob memes? Well, not really. Although I do feel like memes, as we know them, are kind of underneath that umbrella of mimetics. So of course they are. So mimetics sees ideas as a kind of virus, sometimes propagating in spite of truth and logic. Its maxim is like a rule to live by, like a belief of how to behave for best results, etc. Beliefs that survive aren't necessarily true. rules that survive aren't necessarily fair, and rituals that survive aren't necessarily necessary. Things that survive do so because they are good at surviving. So memetics is kind of like the idea of looking at ideas as a virus spreading through the world, through the population, through culture. And virus here isn't necessarily like a bad thing. So we're not talking that it's only bad ideas. These could be very positive, very good ideas. It doesn't matter if they're good or not. So virus kind of has a negative connotation, but we're strictly speaking about kind of like the spread of it. Does it rapidly kind of permeate through the world, through culture, or does it kind of like die off? So we've seen marketing campaigns or pushes by the government where they had some idea that they wanted to like push out there and have everybody believe, and it fell flat on its face because it just didn't connect with people. And we've also had some ideas that spread like wildfire, even though I'm not sure anybody could explain why. For example, if I ask ChatGPT, how do I change the URL of the YouTube video so that it plays at a specified time, right? If I want to start 90 seconds in, how do I do that? It gives a very, very thorough description for how to do that. And it gives you even an example saying like, for example, if this is the URL, here's how you'd start that at like 90 seconds or whatever. But here's my question to you. I've heard estimates that there's something like 14 billion videos on YouTube. And that was a few years ago. It's probably up to 20 billion now. But do you know what video is going to play if I click on that link? You know what it is. You've seen it before. It has annoyed you before. You know exactly what it is, whether you realize it or not. I'm not going to play the video. And if you appreciate me not playing the video, please give this video a thumbs up. If you don't, I will play it. I will do it. I'm serious. What's interesting is the sort of suggested videos there. It says the greatest meme of all time. But my greater point here is that a super persuasive AI is coming, potentially multiple super persuasive AIs. But if you're expecting some sort of a highbrow discussion with carefully crafted points and rebuttals, etc., I mean, maybe, but that might also happen on the side. But I think the main push, the big thing that we're going to see, or maybe even like see but don't realize what's happening, is something that's incredibly good at mimetic warfare. You have an idea that you're trying to get out there in the world, some belief, some faith, or whatever you want to call it, to guide the world in that direction. And there's other groups out there that have different beliefs. How do you maneuver the world to where you're going? How do you kind of steer the ship? Well, mimetic warfare is extremely powerful because if you can share an idea that spreads like wildfire, like a virus, and quickly takes over a lot of people's minds, a lot of people's beliefs, it kind of gets a lot easier to kind of push through whatever you're trying to achieve. So this is one thing to pay attention to. I'm sorry if I went on a little tangent, but we're going to be seeing this soon, if not already seeing it happening live before our eyes. This person is kind of hinting that they are, in fact, an AI agent, level 3 on the OpenAI scale, autonomously going about, creating hype, creating controversy, engaging in this sort of mimetic warfare, if you will. By the way, who knows what the letter of the day is today? It's Q. Q is the letter of the day. If you recall, Q star was the big thing that got leaked at OpenAI back in, I think, November of the previous year. We now know that Q star is strawberry. Now, we've covered the paper called Star, the self-taught reasoner, and some really high-level people on this paper out of Google Research, Stanford, etc. Here they explain a technique called self-taught reasoner, or STAR, as in Q star. We'll get to the Q in just a second. And this just relies on a simple loop: generate rationales to answer many questions, a lot of questions, prompted with a few rationale examples. If the generated answers are wrong, try again to generate a rationale given the correct answer. Fine-tune on all the rationales that ultimately yielded correct answers and repeat. Or put a little bit more simply, you're asking this some simple reasoning questions, right? You're saying, what can be used to carry a small dog? And you give it, 5 answers, right? Is it a swimming pool? Is it a dog show? Well, no. The answer is B, basket. And the model's supposed to pick that correct answer, but before it does, it gives the rationale for that answer. So for example, here the rationale is the answer must be something that can be used to carry a small dog. Baskets are designed to hold things. Therefore, the answer is a basket. So the language model generates a bunch of these rationales. Of course, this is synthetic data. It's data generated by the AI, by the large language models. And we take that synthetic data, the rationales, and we train sort of the version. If this was version 1, this would be like version 1.1 or whatever, however you want to kind of think about that, or version 2.0, however you want to, whatever the case, like the next iteration of it, you train it on those rationales and it becomes better at answering these questions. This is important because this is kind of an example of the model teaching itself, producing rationales that improves its own abilities. So they're saying here, by leveraging the LLM's pre-existing reasoning ability. So it starts out with some reasoning ability. right? We humans, we've managed to create an AI with some reasoning ability. We got it thus far. But next, we iteratively bootstrap the ability to generate high quality rationales. Bootstrap basically meaning it does it itself, like pulling itself up by its bootstraps, if you will, right? It's improving itself. And iteratively means it's just a loop, right? So each time it gets better, it does it again and gets better and does it again and gets better. Now, if you don't think this is a big deal, here's an article from Reuters that got a quote from one of the people on there. So they're talking to Stanford professor Noah Goodman. So that's him right here, Noah Goodman. And Noah's saying that STAR, or self-taught reasoner, it enables AI models to bootstrap themselves into higher intelligent levels via iteratively creating their own training data, like what we talked about. And in theory could be used to get language models to transcend human level intelligence, one of the creators said. By the way, Stanford researchers, people like this, don't tend to be hyperbolic. They don't tend to be hypey or promotional. If he said it, it's likely that he believes that, it's possible that this process could be used to transcend human level intelligence. By the way, we've literally seen this with a lot of the alpha models, Alpha 0, AlphaGo, right? Produces tons of, there's also Alpha Proof and Alpha Geometry 2.0 that recently won the IMO, the International Mathematics Olympiad, or it got silver place, 1 point away from gold. How is this not a bigger story? I have no idea, but it seems like a kind of a big deal. No one's talking about it. But a lot of the foundation for those alpha models, the Google DeepMind models, is this idea of creating its own training data, like the chess software, the Go AI, the one that plays Go, plays against itself, so it engages in self-play, creating millions, billions of games, right? So that's synthetic data. Then it uses that data to get better, so it's training itself. The Alpha Proof created, I think they said, 100 million, if I remember correctly, problems for itself to try to prove or disprove. So it's creating synthetic data, then training itself on that synthetic data. So a lot of times, like in the news, whatever, mainstream news or whatever you say, a lot of people are like, well, we're going to run into data problems, running out of data. A lot of these models are driven by synthetic data. They create the data, then they train themselves on the data. But okay, what is Q? Well, there's another paper that came after the STAR paper, after the self-taught reasoner, called Q star. Right, so Q star is quiet star or strawberry, and it's a interesting way at how LLMs teach themselves to think. And again, we have Noah Goodman, and here we have Stanford, Not Bad AI Inc. And they start by saying, when writing and talking, people sometimes pause to think. I tend to pause to think quite a bit, and this is why I'm so thankful that there now exists AI-powered editing software that cuts out all the silences between my words, between my thoughts. I click a button and it goes chop, 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 and all those pauses disappear. This allows me to sound very smooth and coherent, and I love it. If you saw the unedited footage of this video, it would be a whole other story. And so here they kind of go over what STAR is. This is what we just talked about. And they're introducing Quiet Star, this new idea, this new paper, saying that what if we could have kind of the idea of STAR, but in which these large language models learn to generate rationales at each token, at each word, to explain the future text, improving their predictions. Basically, the idea is almost kind of like you think to yourself before speaking. In the Harry Potter series, for me, one of the most entertaining characters was Creature, this house elf that I think kind of like went mad with pain. And I mean, it's all quite dark, but one very interesting thing that just, I laughed every time, I think every scene that he was in. I'm not sure if it was even supposed to be that comical. I don't know if it was intended for that, but for me, it was just joyous. Because he didn't have a filter. He had to say whatever he was thinking out loud. So when somebody like Hermione would ask him to do something, he would answer kind of as a servant, how he was supposed to answer with, etiquette, etc. And then the thoughts would come in and he would just voice whatever he was thinking as well. So he'd be like, yes, of course I can do that. You dirty, filthy muggle, get out of here. It was, to me, at least, absolutely hilarious. Now, interestingly, we covered in one of the previous videos the fact that Claude actually has some sort of an internal thoughts mechanism or a scratch pad of some sort. So there's certain thoughts that it doesn't voice out loud. And there's a way to kind of like break it a little bit to see its inner workings to where it spells out its thoughts, but by default, they're hidden, right? So here in this paper, for example, they're talking about how the rationale, augmented rationales, sort of as it's writing down its thoughts, as it's thinking about what it's going to say, how that improves over time. So here they investigate the reasoning generated by the language model when it has access to internal rationales, so kind of its quote unquote thoughts, while it generates external rationales, aka the words, the speech, if you will. That's an analogy, obviously, but I think that's a fair way of thinking about it. because these chains of thought are generated by chains of thought, right? So they themselves are generated by chains of thought. One might refer to this as the net of thought or not. This could get confusing or not, right? So here we have, the first response. So kind of what you expect to see. So I feel like this paper will probably deserve a separate video, but it's interesting to see that this does seem to be something that improves its ability to answer questions, to reason, its accuracy. And it's interesting that it's kind of approaching how we humans think and talk, right? So as we're speaking, we have kind of our internal monologue that we're processing what we're going to say next. Maybe we're thinking through how we're going to approach a certain person, what's the first sentence that we're going to say to them, how we're going to structure our argument, etc. We're not necessarily just saying everything that we're thinking. And here we see large language models also benefit from this thinking before you speak. Here they're saying that there's a lot of parallels between chain of thought prompting. So saying, think through this step by step, and then the model just writes out all its reasoning. And, their approach, where it's more like thinking quietly to yourself, but it's saying that these approaches are orthogonal and complementary, meaning that it's not either or, that using them together will have like a net positive effect. They work very well together. They don't take away from each other. They're not duplicating the efforts. They are both, complementary. And as I'm wrapping up this video, I will post this saying that this is what Ilya saw. This thing that we were talking about, right? Q star, strawberry, whatever, quiet star, whatever you want to call it, right? So sort of that idea is what Ilya saw. And this is also probably why Ilya started his very own company, saying that he can get us to superintelligence. Not only that, but safe superintelligence, right? And this is the idea that has broken math benchmarks, certainly alpha proof, alpha geometry 2.0. There's overlap between these ideas, and the rumors about Q star, the internal leak from OpenAI, was that it was extremely good at math. Certainly you can see how. And he's saying it's more akin to RLF than throwing compute at the problem. So RLF is reinforcement learning of human feedback, right? So as it's doing stuff where like give it thumbs up or thumbs down over time, it starts figuring out what we want it to do, kind of like training a dog, for example, with treats or whatever the dog whisperer does when dogs don't behave. He like pokes them or something. I don't know, right? So he's saying it's more like that than just throwing compute at the problem, right? So there's a bottleneck with compute, with chips, with electricity, with power, right? Yeah, I'm sure it would work if we just can like 10x, 100x everything. The neural networks would get better. At this point, we believe that there's so far no limit to how far we can just like scale it up, but we're running into issues with just, electricity and how many chips there are in the world to run this stuff. This is a lot more efficient. I think it's a different way of approaching the problem that doesn't necessarily just means utilizing 10x the resources and making the neural networks just bigger and bigger, right? And he's saying sus column R is a very, very tiny OpenAI model using Strawberry. So the model we tested, sus column R, is a tiny model. The fact that he says very, very tiny, I wonder he means like less than 7 billion parameters or at 7 billion. And he continues Strawberry, and the larger models comes out on Thursday. So that means that sometime next week, we will see if this is true or not. If it is, well, then we have to kind of reconsider everything this person has said in a new light, take it like a lot more seriously. And he's continuing that they do in fact have GPT next, something that was referred to as GPT next, internally called GPT-X, something that we would call GPT-5. He's saying it's ready to go. And he's saying red teaming and post-training is done. Like they've tested it for safety and, well, it's not. It's not safe. It's becoming impossible to make the model safe. If you had this particular model unlocked, you could easily disrupt the world on an unprecedented scale. So if you're ever wondering why GPT-5 is taking so long to get released, it's literally just this guy. This guy is the problem because he tends to jailbreak everything within 24 hours of release, which in this case, if this could be believed, well, this could easily disrupt the world on an unprecedented scale. When you mix in voice, video, Sora agents, and the eye-watering capabilities, things heat up, I guess. They'll get the safety right and they'll roll it out, I'm sure. This is why we post don't die or vague posts around how everything is about to change forever, etc. It is. We've tried the models. That whole don't die thing, if you aren't aware, it's basically a lot of people are saying this would be a really bad time to take some unnecessary risks and, cease to exist just as this technology is coming to the world. Because a lot of people are expecting that, there's going to be a lot of breakthroughs. There's going to be a lot of scientific breakthroughs. What if, every year of AI helping with scientific research, the human sort of healthy lifespan expands by a little bit more than a year. Let's say just a little bit longer. For every year that goes by, our sort of expected healthy range of living increases by a year and a half. If that continues, there could be this sort of escape velocity, right, from dying, right? Not necessarily immortality, but the phrase that was thrown around a number of years ago was negligible senescence. So negligible meaning unnoticeable or so slow that it doesn't even matter. And senescence is aging, right? The aging of your body, your skin, your organs, everything. What if the aging process was slowed down so much that it was negligible? It was barely noticeable. That kind of puts things into a different perspective, doesn't it? And so here he continues. And again, he's kind of stating what he is, right? Because he's hinted in the past as to whether he's an AI agent or not. But here he's saying, I'm not directly an agent, though I've had access to early benchmarks of GPT-5, to take over an account and influence some big names in the field to carry out a few things for me. GitHub was one such case of using the model to convince several to launch. And this is true for such a small account, such a recently created account. He's getting a lot of people with followings to interact with him, to comment on his stuff, to get more and more eyeballs on what he's doing. Even myself, now that I think about it, this is like the second or third video that I've done more or less just covering kind of what he's choosing to focus on. Why? Well, I mean, I guess because he's convincing, you could say. And again, I'm not here to convince you of anything, right? I'm not saying that this is true or false or whatever. I'm saying this is what's playing out right now. And we're focusing on what the conversation is. Right now in the AI circles, this is the conversation. Some people are all the way in. Some people are saying this is all nonsense. We're not going to know right now, but whatever it is, I got to say, this is interesting, right? Next, he's talking about Sora and voice rollouts. He's saying it's expensive, especially Sora, I could imagine. It's proving incredibly difficult to make safe without guardrails. For example, you can, with a simple prompt, create a video of a world leader saying anything in their own style and voice and effortlessly hack into large-scale state secrets. If you haven't read Situational Awareness, it lays a lot of this out. So Situational Awareness is by Mr. Aschenbrenner. So he was on the Dwarkesh Patel podcast. He wrote Situational Awareness, talking about where he believes this whole thing is going. One of the big things that he was saying is that this sort of flywheel of AI improving itself is rapidly accelerating. And if we just give it a few more years, I think 2027, he was saying, by that point, AI progress will hit kind of, I think he was saying intelligence explosion, right? So because it's improving itself, it's going to kind of like rapidly take off. And his concern was around how the various world leaders and the nations, how they will sort of deal with that. Will they play nice? Or are we going back to kind of a more older world where everybody's kind of sitting in their own countries, kind of a lot of distrust between different world leaders, etc. It's a fascinating read, really. And he's saying we will get a step change next week. So this is kind of like that, whatever you want to call it, level 2. It's us kind of ascending to that next level of AI abilities. And he's saying that this next big step that gets released, and he's saying it's not going to be GPT-5, right? That GPT-5 or whatever code name you're using for it, Next or X or whatever, right? That's more comparable to the jump made from GPT-1 to GPT-4. This is why Sam feels great. And Ilya was right. You can scale your way to a digital god with or without strawberries, right? So Ilya was talking to a number of podcasts, Lex Friedman for one, saying that, yeah, it seems like that one way to just keep improving AI is just scale, scale, scale. There's limitations to that. There's bottlenecks. There's just resource constraints, but there's no sort of law that prevents us from just making them bigger and bigger. No physical limitation or nothing that kind of like just stops that growth for any reason. And then they continue, but strawberries plus scale will cure world problems overnight. So if we're able to scale it up plus use this sort of strawberries, quiet star, whatever, this sort of approach, well, that's really where the rapid progress is going to happen. So big if true. And I agree. If this stuff is real, we're going to see some pretty crazy stuff over the next few weeks, starting next week, I guess. And of course, this means that we're slowly approaching kind of that third level, which is agents, agentic swarms, or the Earth. And whatever the case is, it's scary, it's exciting, and I would say just be happy that we live in a world and a timeline where you get to witness this live happening and unfolding in front of you. That whole saying, may you live in exciting times, they were saying that's not a good thing to say to a person because it implies kind of chaos. But I got to say, these are exciting times and I'm kind of enjoying it. Stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed. Please hit the thumbs up to help me out, train the Google AI algorithm to push this out there. My name is Wes Roth, and thank you for watching.